So I want to talk really briefly about Schrader. Schrader being the elected representative for Oregon's 5th Congressional District. He's a Democrat in the House. Personally, he's not my representative. I live in the 4th District. We have Peter DeFazio, but he's only one district away, and I've been there a number of times, and I know people there, and so maybe people will still respect my credentials as somewhat of a quasi-local speaking about the subject. I want to talk about what he just did to allow pharmaceutical companies to continue to price gouge people to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'll get into the details in a second, but this is especially for anybody that lives in that district, which I understand most of my audience probably doesn't, and for the people that don't, you can just hear this as another example of the ever-present behind-the-scenes corruption of obscure politicians that you probably haven't heard of on obscure subcommittees in the House of Representatives, making decisions in the dark on bills which are under-discussed, on specific amendments to those bills. Hundreds of pages long the bills are, and they'll put in little amendments to defend their constituencies if their constituencies are special interests in corporations, or in this case the pharmaceutical industry, which gave Schrader $166,000 last election cycle. Their PACs did, and now he's paying them back. And so what specifically did Schrader do? Well, he's a Democrat on the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House, which is a powerful subcommittee that decides the rules of a lot of obscure things that have a big impact on a lot of people. And so right now there's a couple bills that are going through the House. One has already passed the Senate, which is the infrastructure bill, and they're trying to tie that together with the other reconciliation bill, kind of the human infrastructure bill, which is currently making its way through the House of Representatives. But if it were to pass, it would pass by a very narrow margin. But right now they're fleshing out the details of a number of provisions within the bill, which are not super great for getting clicks and, news headlines and engagement for people, and also not the type of thing that kind of the corporate world or advertisements really want people to watch. And so instead they talk about different cultural war issues, while the important decisions are happening in obscurity on boring committees like this, where representatives like Schrader are making those decisions, oftentimes, and in this case, to the interests of the special interests which funded his campaign. And so in this case, there's people probably know, in the US we pay more for prescription drugs than any other country in the world. We pay approximately twice as much for prescription drugs, which are exactly the same drugs as other countries. In fact, in the US, if you go to Canada, a number of the drugs are a fraction of the price of the US drugs, even though they're manufactured in the US. So they're manufactured here, they're sent to Canada. Canada is allowed to, and their government does, negotiate drug prices so that the pharmaceutical industry is not price gouging their people. And so as a result of that, those drugs, for example, the EpiPen's the most common one, but a number of other ones also, are sold at a fraction of the price as they are here in the US, where there's no regulations, and they're able to price gouge people as much as possible, and they're able to do it because they've bought in politicians like Schrader. Well, the Democrats for a long time, I think at least since 2006, have had on their agenda to stop that, to pass legislation which would reform pharmaceutical industry price gouging, and specifically allow the government, i.e. Medicare, to negotiate drug prices for the pharmaceutical industry. Like I said, you can't do that in the US right now, except for the VA is allowed to do that, and as a result, the VA, their drug prices are significantly cheaper than everybody else in the US that has to purchase prescription drugs. I think it's about a third cheaper, although I don't know the exact numbers. But if Medicare was allowed to do that, that would substantially reduce drug prices for a lot of people and thereby cut into the profits of the price gouging pharmaceutical industry. And so Schrader teamed up with every single Republican on that subcommittee, plus 2 other Democrats, to vote against and vote down the provision that would allow Medicare to negotiate those drug prices and thereby save millions of dollars for his constituents, who are getting price gouged by the pharmaceutical industry for drugs that they need to survive. And again, the reason he did it is because they paid him $166,000 last election cycle for his PAC. Why did they donate it to him? Was it because they like him as a person? Is that how corporations operate? No, they did it because he's a powerful, obscure representative with the ability to vote down provisions like this, which are extremely popular and everybody supports. That's actually in the public. Over 90% of the public supports it, but they still somehow never pass. And it's things like this. It's things like, if people know what the carried interest tax loophole is, that's something that everybody supports repealing. Clinton supports it, Trump supported it, the Republicans support it, Democrats support it when you ask them. different corporate tax loopholes. Everybody's like, oh yeah, we need to get rid of those. Somehow they never happen. Why do they never happen? Well, the industry, which funds the politicians and buys them effectively, ensures that it never happens because of votes like this on subcommittees that people just don't pay attention to because the news doesn't cover it that much, because it's not sensational, and also because the special interests which fund the news would rather have people talking about Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss and different culture war issues than the common enemy which they have, which is oftentimes the special interests which have bought the country and bought the politicians and make sure that nothing good ever passes. Because of Kurt Schrader. What is Kurt Schrader and the other politicians who cast votes like this, what is their excuse? Because they have to have some type of rationale to throw to the people when they inevitably are asked about it, and then they're like, okay, I did it because of this reason. And coincidentally, it's never that they've been bought by these special interests and that they're worried about their political careers or that their financing for their next campaign might dry up. If they vote against them, it's always because they care so much about the people. And the reason the reason that they give for banning this is that they say if the government's allowed to negotiate drug prices and reduce prices for people, then that will cut into the money that the pharmaceutical industry spends on research to develop new pharmaceuticals and drugs. And right now I don't have internet, so I can't look up the exact numbers, but I'll put them here in the video. But the amount of money that the pharmaceutical industry spends on research and development is approximately 15% of their budget, which is dwarfed by the amount of money that they spend on advertising, as anybody who turns on the television sees all the time. And it's also dwarfed by the amount of money that they've spent on stock buybacks, which effectively do nothing other than boost their own share price, which boosts executive compensation because that's tied to the rise in share price, but it doesn't do any good for anybody other than the rich people that are running those corporations. So they spend more money on advertising, pushing pills to people oftentimes that don't need them. Other countries, you're not allowed to do that either. There's not like television commercials. Ask your doctor if you need this pill. Look how happy these people are. You should probably go get this pill. Are they doing that because they care about you? No, they're trying to make as much money as possible. And another way they do that is price gouging people. And another way they do that is buying back their own shares, which they spend much more money on than research and development. And so it's total BS. Also, most of the research and development, which leads to new drugs, is publicly financed. It comes from NIH grants. It goes to grants at universities. It's publicly financed, and then the profits are privatized. But that's a whole nother issue. A lot of the R&D goes towards slightly like coming up with like new versions of their cash cows, like finding the next, Viagra, or slightly tinkering existing drugs so that they're allowed to repatent those. They also lobby effectively for patent protections on their new drugs so that they're or on their existing drugs so that there is not allowed to be generics, which would cut their profits also. These are the things they spend money on. Spending money to help people is very, very little. And the idea that people like Kurt Schrader is doing it to stop them from making sure that they can continue to come up with new drugs is totally ridiculous. And he must think that the people of Oregon's 5th Congressional District are idiots, because nobody would believe that if they paid attention to it. Now, people aren't paying attention to it because it's obscure, it's technocratic, it's in the dark, it's not sensational, and people have lives. But I would encourage you, again, if you are in that district, look up and see if what I said is true. Here's the American Prospect article. It's out there, but you have to do digging if you want to find it out. But if it is true and this is something that's bad, I would encourage you to call Kurt Schrader's office. Here's his number. Go to his town halls, if he ever holds town halls, and ask him about this. Write letters to the editor, to your local paper, I forget what it's called, like the Statesman Journal or whatever it is in Salem, and maybe tell other people in the district about it, because even the self-interested politician, if they get enough pressure from their constituents, will do the right thing. And I think that could be the case in this instance as well, but if not, at least you know about it. So